This is my true story. I worked my whole life for one dream: to rest in peace with the savings I built through sweat and sacrifice. I thought my son would protect me, the same way I once protected him. But I was wrong. He took everything I had, my pension, my future, my trust. And then he threw me out of my own home like I was nothing. I lost everything in one night. But what he didn't know was that I carried his darkest secrets, and I gave them to the police. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe. For 45 years of my life, I woke up before the sun and went to work. My body knew the sound of alarms more than it knew the comfort of rest. I worked in factories, in offices, in warehouses. Wherever there was work, I was there. My hands grew rough, my back bent, my hair turned gray long before its time. But I never complained. Every long hour, every sleepless night, every aching bone, it all had one purpose: my family. I believed that the sweat I gave today would buy them a better tomorrow. And most of all, I believed that my son would never forget who gave him that tomorrow. From the moment he was born, I decided my life would be for him. I saved every penny I could, building my pension bit by bit like stacking bricks for a house. That pension was my lifeline. I didn't buy luxuries, I didn't waste money on myself, and I didn't live freely. I lived carefully, so that when I reached old age, I could finally rest. Not as a burden to anyone, but as a man who had earned his peace. My dream was simple: to sit on the porch in my old years, tea in my hand, watching my grandchildren play, knowing that my work was done. But my sacrifices didn't stop at savings. I gave my son everything I could while he was growing up. His education was the first priority. When the bills for school came in, I paid them, even if it meant skipping meals. When he wanted books, I bought them, even if it meant wearing the same old shoes for another year. When he dreamed of going to college, I worked double shifts to make sure he got there. I never wanted him to feel the hunger or struggle I had once known. When he grew older, I didn't just stop at education. I helped him with a house, giving him a place to live when he got married. I even introduced him to people I knew from my old work contacts, helping him find a career path. Every time I had something, I handed it to him with open palms, never asking for anything in return except respect. And every time I told myself, blood is stronger than anything. He is my son. He will always remember. That belief carried me through every storm. On nights when I was too tired to even lift my head, I told myself, this is for him. On mornings when I didn't know how I would pay the bills, I told myself, this is for his future. And when I put money into my pension fund instead of buying things for myself, I reminded myself, one day, this will protect both of us. I never doubted him. I never imagined he could betray me. Because how could a son betray a father who had given him everything? How could a man forget the one who gave him life, food, shelter, and love? I thought the bond of blood was sacred. I thought my sacrifices would build not just his life, but his loyalty. Looking back, I realized that was my mistake. I gave too much, too freely. I thought love was enough to secure loyalty. I thought sacrifice was enough to guarantee respect. I thought blood was enough to protect me in old age. But I was wrong. Blood means nothing to a man who values money over family, and sacrifices mean nothing to a man who only knows how to take, never to give. At the time, though, I was blind. I still believed my retirement would be peaceful, supported by the family I had built with my own hands. I still believed that the pension I worked for would keep me safe. And I still believed that my son would never let me fall. But all of those beliefs were shattered the day I handed him my trust, and he turned it into betrayal. Betrayal rarely arrives loudly. It comes quietly, disguised as care, wrapped in words that sound like love. That's how it began with my son. He didn't snatch my pension overnight. He didn't shout or threaten in the beginning. No, he smiled, he reassured, and he convinced me that handing him control was for my own good. It started with him offering to help me manage my bills. He would watch me sit at the table, Glasses perched on my nose, slowly going through papers, squinting at numbers that seemed to blur together more with each year. "Dad," he said softly one evening, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you don't need to stress yourself like this anymore. Times are different now. Finances are complicated. Let me handle this for you. You should relax. You've worked your whole life. Let me carry the load." Those words touched me. For a moment, I felt pride. I thought, yes, this is the reward of my sacrifices. My son is stepping up to protect me. His voice was calm, convincing, filled with the kind of confidence that makes an old man feel safe. I didn't question his intentions. Why would I? He was my son. Weeks passed, and slowly he began taking over. First, he offered to pay bills online for me. "Don't bother with the paperwork, Dad. I'll take care of it." Then he asked me to let him keep an eye on my bank account, just so nothing goes wrong. When I hesitated, he smiled and said, "It's all for the family. I'll make sure your money lasts longer. You can trust me." And I did. Blindly. Then came the pension. He told me the funds were too much responsibility for me to handle on my own. "Dad," he said one evening, "why don't you let me manage the pension account? I'll make sure it grows, I'll invest it smartly, and you'll never have to worry about money again." His words sounded so practical, so full of concern. He spoke of protecting me, of making sure my old age was comfortable. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that after decades of sacrifice, my son was finally protecting me the way I once protected him. I signed the papers he placed before me, transferring access into his name. My hands shook, not because I doubted him, but because I was touched by what I thought was love. I thought, this is what blood means. This is what family is for. Looking back, I see the manipulation clearly. Every word he spoke was rehearsed, every gesture calculated. He played the role of a caring son while quietly moving me closer to ruin. But in that moment, I was blind. I didn't see betrayal. I saw loyalty. I didn't see theft. I saw responsibility. And so, I handed him my trust. I gave him the keys to everything I had worked for, everything I had saved, everything that was supposed to protect me in my final years. I gave it freely, with a heart full of faith. What I didn't know was that the moment I handed him that trust, I handed him the knife that he would one day use to cut me down. For months, I didn't question anything. I believed my son was managing my pension with care, making sure I was secure. I noticed I wasn't receiving updates, but whenever I asked, he brushed it off with a smile. "Don't worry, Dad," he would say. "Everything is fine. Trust me." And I did. Those words, "trust me," became poison, but at the time they tasted like love. Then one evening, everything changed. I came home to find my belongings packed into boxes, sitting on the porch like trash. My clothes folded carelessly, my old photographs tossed on top, my shoes scattered. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. My heart pounded as I stepped through the doorway, only to find my son standing there with his arms crossed, his face cold, his voice sharp. "This is my house now," he said flatly. "You don't belong here anymore." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you saying?" My voice shook. "This is my home. I built this place. I paid for everything here. How can you—" He cut me off with a laugh. Not the laugh of a loving son, but the laugh of a man who knew he had won. "Not anymore. You gave me everything. The pension, the accounts. It's all under my name now. And I'm not wasting it on you. You're not my responsibility." My knees buckled. The world seemed to tilt. "Your responsibility?" I whispered, my throat tightening. "I raised you. I fed you. I gave you everything I had." He stepped closer, his voice cruel. "And now you've given me your future too. You're old, Dad. Useless. Why should I spend my life carrying you? You should be grateful I let you stay this long." Those words pierced deeper than any knife. Gratitude? For being discarded? For being betrayed? My chest ached, not from age, but from heartbreak. I looked toward the boxes outside, the life I had built reduced to nothing but scraps on the porch. My pension, my home, my sacrifices, all stolen, all twisted into a weapon against me. I had worked 45 years for this moment, the moment when my son would take care of me, and instead, he had stripped me of everything and thrown me into the cold. "Get out," he said firmly, his eyes hard. "Don't make me call the police. If you step inside again, I'll have you arrested." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fall to my knees and beg him to remember the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy I once protected with everything I had. But when I opened my mouth, no words came, only silence. The weight of humiliation pressed me down until I couldn't breathe. I stepped outside, each movement heavy with shame. The night was cold, and the wind cut through my clothes as I stood on the porch beside my boxes. My neighbor's lights glowed from across the street, and for the first time in my life, I lowered my head, too ashamed to be seen. I, who had once been strong, who had once been proud, was now nothing but an old man standing in the dark with nowhere to go. My son closed the door behind me. The lock clicked, sealing the truth. I no longer belonged in the home I built. I sat on one of the boxes, my head in my hands, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying just for the home I had lost. I was crying for the love I thought was unbreakable, the bond of blood I thought could never betray me. That night, betrayal didn't just take my pension, it took my heart. The nights that followed were the hardest of my life. I left my house with nothing but a few boxes and the clothes on my back. A friend, an old neighbor who had always respected me, offered me a spare room. It wasn't much, just a small bed, a chair, and a single lamp, but at least it was shelter. I was grateful, yet every time I lay down, shame pressed heavier on my chest than the blankets ever could. I couldn't sleep. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't rest. I kept replaying the moment my son stood in the doorway, arms crossed, telling me I was not his responsibility. Those words echoed through my head like thunder. Not my responsibility. After 45 years of sacrifice, after a lifetime of work, after raising him, feeding him, guiding him, I had been reduced to nothing but a burden in his eyes. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man I had built with my own 2 hands, had turned me into an outcast. Some nights I stared at the ceiling until the first light of dawn. My stomach often growled, but it wasn't hunger that kept me awake. It was humiliation. Hunger fades, but shame lingers. I thought of the neighbors who might have seen me leaving my house that night, head lowered, boxes in hand. Did they whisper about me? Did they wonder what crime I had committed to deserve being thrown out of my own home? The shame burned hotter than fire. I tried to distract myself by remembering better times. I thought of when my son was a boy, running through the yard, his laughter filling the air. I thought of the nights I held him when he was sick, whispering that he would be all right. I thought of the mornings I skipped meals so he could eat, of the shoes I wore until they had holes so he could have new ones for school. Those memories once gave me comfort. Now they only cut deeper, reminding me of how far he had strayed. The betrayal burned deeper than poverty ever could. I had known poverty before. In my youth, I worked with blistered hands, sometimes going hungry, sometimes living on scraps. But even then, I had hope. I believed my sacrifices meant something. I believed my son was my purpose, my protection in old age. But now, stripped of my home, stripped of my pension, stripped of my dignity, I realized poverty wasn't the worst fate. Betrayal was. Poverty empties your pockets. Betrayal empties your soul. I ate my meals quietly in my friend's house, ashamed to even look him in the eye. He never asked questions, but I could see in his eyes that he wondered what had happened. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to explain. But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. How could I admit that my own son, the boy I gave my life for, had stolen my pension and thrown me out like garbage? How could I confess that the blood bond I trusted had shattered so easily? Silence was easier. Silence was safer. So I carried the truth like a hidden wound, bleeding quietly in the dark. Each night I told myself to endure. Each night I whispered that I would survive. But deep inside, something else began to stir. Anger. Not the kind that makes a man shout, but the kind that simmers, slow and steady, waiting for the right moment to boil over. My son believed he had broken me, that he had left me powerless, but he had forgotten something. I knew his secrets. I knew the skeletons he had buried, the lies he had hidden, the frauds he thought no one would ever discover. And as I lay awake in those quiet nights, humiliation slowly turned into clarity. I realized I had two choices. I could die with his betrayal carved into my soul, or I could rise and make him answer for what he had done. Poverty I could endure, but betrayal demanded justice. When a man loses everything, he begins to see clearly. In those sleepless nights, sitting alone in my friend's spare room, I thought back to all the years I had spent watching my son grow. Not just as a boy, but as a man. And I realized something I had ignored for too long. I knew his secrets. Secrets darker than anything he had done to me. Secrets that could shatter the image he had built for himself. Secrets that could destroy not just his career, but his freedom. For years, I had kept quiet. I told myself it was to protect the family name. I thought silence was loyalty. I believed that even if he strayed, even if he stumbled, it was my duty as a father to shield him from the consequences. But now, after he stole my pension and threw me out like trash, silence no longer felt like loyalty. It felt like weakness. It felt like I had been protecting a man who never once thought of protecting me. I remembered the first time I noticed something strange. He had just started working, and suddenly, money began flowing in far too quickly. He bought things he couldn't afford, lived in a way his salary couldn't explain. I asked him once gently how he managed it. He laughed and said, "Don't worry about it, Dad." Times are different now. I wanted to believe him. I convinced myself it was just luck, maybe smart investments. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the business dealings. He once asked me to sign as a witness on a document. The numbers didn't add up, but he brushed it off, telling me it was just business. Later, I overheard him bragging to a friend on the phone about shifting company funds into his own accounts, about cutting corners, about fooling clients who trusted him. My stomach turned, but I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I told myself he would grow out of it. But the worst was the stolen money. I found out by accident when I came across a receipt he had hidden in his drawer, proof that he had siphoned funds from the company where he worked. He had forged signatures, created false invoices, and pocketed thousands. I confronted him once, quietly, asking why he was doing it. His eyes went cold, and he said, "Don't act so holy, old man. Everyone cheats the system. That's how you win." I should have gone to the police then. I should have exposed him before his crimes grew bigger. But I didn't. Because he was my son. Because I still believed he would change. Because I thought silence was love. Now, sitting in that small room with nothing left to my name, I realized the truth. Silence had protected him, but it had destroyed me. And if I stayed silent any longer, it would not only bury me, it would bury justice itself. I began to gather my memories, piecing together every detail I had once ignored. The fake invoices, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the stolen money. I remembered where I had stored some of the old receipts and records, tucked away in boxes I had kept for years. I had never thrown them out, though I couldn't explain why at the time. Maybe a part of me always knew this day would come. As the night stretched on, my shame slowly transformed into something sharper. Resolve. My son thought he had stripped me of everything. He thought taking my pension and my home had left me powerless. But he had forgotten the one thing I still had, the truth. And the truth was lethal. I whispered to myself in the dark, "He took my pension. He stole my future. But I will hand him to the police." Justice doesn't come on its own. It must be built, step by step, with the same patience a man uses to build a house brick by brick. I knew that if I was going to take down my son, I couldn't rely on anger alone. I couldn't walk into a station with empty hands. I needed proof, solid, undeniable proof that would speak louder than my words. And deep inside, I knew I already had it. I had been keeping pieces of it for years, without realizing that one day they would save me. The first thing I did was revisit the boxes of old papers I had carried with me through each move. Most people would have thrown them away, but I was a man who kept everything: receipts, letters, contracts, even scraps of invoices. That habit, once mocked by my son as old-fashioned hoarding, became my weapon. Inside those boxes were the shadows of his crimes. I pulled them out one by one, laying them on the table in my friend's spare room, the lamp casting a yellow glow over decades of memories and secrets. There it was, the receipt from the hotel he had paid with company funds, the one he swore was for business travel. There were the bank statements that didn't line up with his salary, showing deposits from sources that had no explanation. There were the invoices he had once asked me to witness, now clearly forged with mismatched signatures. Each page I uncovered was another nail in the coffin of the life he had built on lies. I organized everything into neat piles, my hands trembling not with fear but with purpose. For years I had been silent, telling myself that protecting him was protecting the family. But now I saw that silence had made me his shield, allowing him to grow bolder, to dig deeper into corruption. My pension was just the latest theft. He had been stealing long before, but now he had stolen from me, and I would not stay silent any longer. But evidence on paper wasn't enough. I needed dates, connections, proof that the money trails weren't just mistakes, but deliberate crimes. So I began retracing the stories I had overheard. I remembered the friend he had once bragged to on the phone about beating the system. I recalled the night I saw him shredding documents, his face pale when he realized I had noticed. These memories, once dismissed, now became puzzle pieces I could fit into the larger picture. Every night, I worked in silence, piecing together a case. I kept the folder hidden under my bed, checking and rechecking it until I knew it was airtight. Fraud, embezzlement, theft, lies. His whole empire wasn't built on hard work like he claimed. It was built on crime. For the first time since he threw me out of my house, I felt strong. Not because I had money, that was gone. Not because I had a home, that too was gone. But because I had something more powerful than both. The truth. I thought of how he had laughed when he told me I wasn't his responsibility anymore. I thought of the coldness in his voice when he threw my belongings on the porch, and I thought of how he looked at me like I was nothing. That memory no longer broke me, it fueled me. Because soon he would know what it felt like to be treated as nothing. Soon he would learn that the old man he had discarded carried the power to destroy everything he had built. I whispered to myself as I sealed the folder shut, "You stole my pension, but I will steal your freedom." The plan was ready. The only step left was to walk into the police station and hand them everything. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a witness. And my testimony would end him. The morning I decided to go to the police, I woke before the sun. For years, I had risen early for work, but this time was different. My body was heavy with age, but my mind was sharp with purpose. I dressed carefully, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to walk into that station with dignity. I tucked the folder under my arm, the folder filled with his lies, his theft, his crimes. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like 45 years of sacrifice compressed into one final act of justice. The walk to the station was long. Each step echoed with memories. I remembered the day I taught my son how to ride a bicycle, running beside him as he wobbled and fell, encouraging him to get back up. I remembered the day I signed over access to my pension, thinking I was securing both our futures. And I remembered the night he threw me out of my house, his eyes cold, his voice sharp. "You're not my responsibility." That night, I had felt powerless. But today, I was no longer powerless. Today, I carried the truth in my hands, and the truth was stronger than his arrogance. When I arrived, the station smelled of old paper, coffee, and sweat. A young officer at the front desk looked up as I entered. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked politely. "Yes," I said firmly, though my voice was low. "I'm here to report crimes, serious ones. I have evidence." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical at first, but when I laid the folder on the counter and opened it just enough to reveal the stack of receipts, invoices, and statements, his expression changed. He called for a detective immediately. Within minutes, I was sitting in a small interview room, the folder laid open on the table, my trembling hands resting on its edges. The detective was a middle-aged man, serious and calm. He introduced himself, then began looking through the documents. His eyes narrowed as he turned each page, flipping through invoices, receipts, and notes. "Where did you get all of this?" he asked. I leaned back, my voice steady. "From my son. He left trails everywhere. He thought no one would notice. I noticed. And I kept everything." The detective nodded slowly, taking notes. "This is serious. Fraud, embezzlement, theft of company funds. We'll need to verify all of it, but if what you're showing me is true, he won't walk away from this." I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel humiliated. I didn't feel small. I felt like my voice mattered again. And then, I said the line I had been waiting to speak, the line that carried all my pain and all my resolve. "My son took my future. Now I'm handing you his." The detective didn't respond right away. He just looked at me, then at the folder, then back at me. Finally, he said, "You did the right thing. This will go far." I nodded, though a part of me ached at the thought. It wasn't easy to hand your own son to the police. It wasn't easy to turn love into evidence, to trade blood for justice. But when blood betrays you, justice is the only family left. As I left the station, the air felt lighter, the sky brighter. I walked slower this time, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every step. Each step was a reminder. I was no longer carrying silence. I was carrying justice. It didn't take long. Only a few days after I walked into the police station, the storm broke. My son thought he was untouchable. He thought the pension he stole, the house he claimed, the lies he lived behind made him invincible. But truth moves faster than arrogance, and truth had finally caught him. It started in the morning. He left the house as usual, briefcase in hand, adjusting his tie in the mirror like he was preparing for battle. I watched him from a distance, calm, knowing what he didn't. He strutted down the street, shoulders back, still carrying himself like a king. But kings fall hardest when their thrones are built on lies. By noon, the raid had begun. Police cars pulled up to his office, their sirens silent but their presence loud. Officers in dark uniforms walked through the glass doors of his workplace, carrying folders and warrants. They didn't move fast. They moved with certainty, the way hunters walk when they already know their prey cannot escape. Inside, I later learned, chaos erupted. His colleagues stared as the detectives entered his office. His boss, the man who had once praised him as trustworthy, stood there cold-faced as they laid evidence across the desk. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. Each word was a hammer striking the walls of his empire. My son tried to speak, tried to deny it, but the folder I had handed the police spoke louder than his words ever could. Receipts, bank records, forged invoices. Every lie he told now stared back at him in black ink. He was cornered, stripped of the smooth tongue he once used to manipulate everyone, even me. "Please wait," he begged, his voice cracking. But there was no waiting. The law doesn't pause for arrogance. The officers escorted him out, his wrists in cuffs, his head lowered as whispers spread through the office. The same colleagues who once envied him now looked at him with disgust. The same friends who praised his wealth now turned their eyes away. In one morning, his mask shattered, and the man beneath was nothing but a criminal. Back at home, news traveled fast. Calls rang in from relatives, neighbors, people who had once called him successful, and admirable. They asked questions, whispered rumors, repeated headlines from the news that evening. Local businessman arrested for fraud. His name was everywhere, but not in the way he wanted. He was no longer the son who succeeded. He was the son who stole. I sat quietly in the corner of my friend's house, listening to the radio as the story unfolded. The announcer's voice was steady, listing the charges, the frozen accounts, the seized assets. Everything he had built on my sacrifices and on his lies was gone overnight. His cars, his house, his bank accounts, all under investigation, all stripped from him as quickly as he stripped me of my pension. And then came the image I will never forget. My son, led from the courthouse in handcuffs, his once proud face pale, his eyes hollow. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. But he kept his head down, no smirk, no arrogance, no pride. The man who once threw me onto the street like garbage was now being thrown into the back of a police van. The same people who once praised him now spoke of him in shame. The same relatives who once turned away from me now whispered that I had been the true man all along. Justice had flipped the script, and though it could not erase the betrayal, it erased the power he once had over me. That night, I lay in bed and breathed deeply. For the first time in months, I felt peace. He was no longer free to mock me. He was no longer free to steal from me. He was no longer free to live on lies while I suffered in silence. Justice had taken him where he belonged. And as I closed my eyes, I thought, the son who stole my pension is now paying his debt in chains. When the news broke, it spread faster than fire on dry grass. Everyone who once held my son up as a symbol of success now whispered his name with disgust. The phone in my friend's house rang for days. Relatives, distant cousins, old neighbors, all of them wanted to talk, but not to him. They wanted to talk about what had happened. Did you hear? He's been arrested. They say he was stealing for years. I always wondered how he had so much money. Their voices carried a mix of shock, judgment, and in some, a strange satisfaction. The golden boy had fallen, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. But none of them had been there the night he threw me out. None of them saw the coldness in his eyes, the cruelty in his voice, as he told me I wasn't his responsibility. They hadn't watched me walk into the dark with my belongings stuffed into boxes, humiliated and broken. They only saw the headline. I had lived the story. Relatives who once turned their backs on me now tried to speak kindly, pretending they hadn't admired him when he flaunted his wealth. "We always knew you were the strong one of them said over the phone. I listened quietly, not replying. Where were they when I was sleeping on a spare bed, ashamed to even lift my head? Where were they when I walked through the cold night with no home left to my name? Respect offered too late is no respect at all. But still, the truth brought a strange form of justice. For years I had been painted as the old man who should step aside, the father who was too weak to manage things. My son told everyone he was the one carrying me, the one taking responsibility for the family. Now the mask was gone. The same people who believed his lies now saw him for what he was, a thief, a fraud, a son without loyalty. And in contrast, they saw me as the man who had endured it all and finally brought the truth to light. I began to walk in public again without lowering my head. The neighbors who once pitied me now nodded respectfully. Some even stopped me to say, "You did the right thing." Their words didn't erase the pain of betrayal, but they gave me back something my son had stolen: dignity. At night, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought of the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for, the thief he had become. I thought of how love had blinded me for so long, how silence had protected him when it should have protected me. And I realized something. Justice doesn't always mean happiness. Justice doesn't heal every wound. But justice restores balance. And balance was all I needed. My son sat behind bars now. His empire of lies crumbled, his reputation destroyed. And while a part of me still ached, the part that remembered holding him as a baby, teaching him to walk, working double shifts so he could eat, another part of me finally breathed free. Because I knew one thing with certainty: he could no longer hurt me. Not with lies, not with theft, not with betrayal. The aftermath was not easy. There were nights I still woke up with tears in my eyes, mourning the son I thought I had, mourning the love I believed would last forever. But in those same nights, I also felt a quiet strength. I had faced humiliation, I had faced betrayal, and I had turned them into justice. For the first time in a long time, I stood tall, not because I had wealth or property, but because I had the courage to do what needed to be done. Justice does not always come in the form of applause or celebration. It comes quietly, like a sunrise after a storm, spreading light where there was once only darkness. In the days and weeks after my son's arrest, I found myself walking differently. My back, though bent with age, felt straighter. My steps, though slow, carried more weight. For the first time in years, I felt like a man again, not a burden, not a shadow, but a man who had faced betrayal and refused to die with it in his chest. People often ask me if it was hard, turning my own son over to the police, and the truth is, yes, it was the hardest thing I have ever done. A father's heart does not simply stop loving, even when it has been torn apart. Part of me will always remember him as the boy who clung to my hand when crossing the street, the boy who smiled when I surprised him with new shoes, the boy who once said, "I want to be like you, Dad." That memory still hurts, because the man he became was nothing like the child I raised. But love without justice is weakness, and I could not allow weakness to be my final chapter. In exposing him, I also exposed myself. The years of silence, the years of protecting him when I should have stopped him, the years of telling myself that loyalty meant looking the other way. But in the end, I learned that true loyalty is not protecting lies. True loyalty is protecting what is right. And sometimes, justice requires cutting down even those you once carried. I did not find peace in his suffering. I did not celebrate his downfall. I found peace in knowing that my sacrifices were not wasted. Every hour I worked, every penny I saved, every sleepless night I endured, they did not die in vain. They became the weapon of truth. They became the foundation of justice. The pension he stole, the home he threw me out of, the dignity he tried to bury. All of it came back to me, not in wealth, but in honor. I lived quietly after, but with dignity. I no longer lowered my head in shame. Neighbors who once whispered about me now greeted me with respect. Friends who once pitied me now spoke of courage. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I no longer saw a broken old man. I saw a survivor. I saw a man who had lost everything, but refused to let betrayal be the final word. Sometimes, when I sit alone with my tea, I wonder if he thinks of me in his cell. I wonder if he remembers the father who worked for decades to build him a life. I wonder if he regrets the night he threw me out into the cold. But whether he does or not, it no longer matters. His choices were his, and mine were mine. He chose betrayal. I chose justice. Final thought, he stole my pension. I stole his freedom, and justice was mine at last.